Hello there, everyone. How are you today? Super excited about joining you today with this lovely new collaborative series. Yes, I'm literally on a roll, folks. I'm just getting all my lovely biz besties, and we're just going to collab you out for the rest of the year. Anyway, if this is your first time joining me, my name is Patricia Hayes. I'm an executive advisor and career empowerment coach and authentic networking strategist. But here today, I am the trainee, and I am with my dear friend, Brienne, who is going to tell you all about herself. And we have been chit-chatting and come up with a new series. This is going to be a 4-part series that's called Embracing Your Voice and Unleashing Your Power Within. And we're going to be talking about your literal physical voice, but also your internal voice, and taking a deeper look and seeing how that affects us and how we communicate and show up in our daily lives, personally and professionally. Brienne, how are you today?
I am so delightful because I'm here and this is coming to life, and I'm just so grateful.
I'm super excited. I'm super excited. So a little bit about me. I'm a lawyer by training. Save all the lawyer jokes. I've heard them all. But I have spent a ton of time working in the legislative arena as a lobbyist and doing a lot of things that required me to speak a lot. I did a lot of speech writing. I've literally been writing and doing public speaking since I was 14 years old. Do not try to figure out how old I am. And but the thing we're going to be talking about here about voice care and how you actually care for your voice, not just how you use it as far as putting forth the words. It's not something I really learned anything about in all those years, right? And so that's what we're going to be talking about here on this first session, which is the hidden prep tool that every public speaker uses, but forgets about. And I'm leading with the answer there, but Brienne, pop in there and tell us a little bit more about you before we get started.
Absolutely. Thanks, Patricia. So I am Brienne Hennessy. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And my background is as a speech and voice pathologist. I spent nearly 14 years in voice clinics across the country, rehabilitating injured voices from all walks of life and all kinds of professions, from, a state of difficulty communicating and even having sound, all the way back to being able to keep doing their job and keep doing the activities that they love. And throughout that time, I started to really see some gaps in the process. And a big gap for me stood out when people would often say, well, I didn't think about this before, kind of like you alluded to, Patricia. Like, sure, I talk every day, but I don't know. It didn't occur to me that this could change in such a way that I'm sitting in a clinic now hoping that my voice will return to its normal function. And often when that started to show up, it really just required, more education. There's just this gap in preventative knowledge and proactive care that people can easily take. But like we kind of said, it's not often thought about, or it's taken for granted. Because how many of us wake up in the morning and are like, my voice will be there until it's not. Yeah. And in that moment, it can feel frustrating, of course. It's inconvenient. It can feel worrisome. And then it can really devolve into disrupting quality of life and your livelihood. So I'm really grateful that in the process of seeing, that gap and wanting to do something more about it, I was introduced to this idea of building a business and becoming an entrepreneur. And for me, that was a big mental shift of way of thinking. And I'm just really delighted that now I can focus on making sure that people are preventatively aware, because how many of us want to spend, any of our time, money, insurance dollars in healthcare settings if we don't have to? We have better things to do with our lives. So I'm just grateful that this is out there. And so now with my business, Your Vocal Vitality, I focus primarily on executives, coaches, public speakers, educators, those who use their voice to do their job. Your voice is an asset. It's meant to rise above the rest. And when you care for it like an athlete cares for their sport, you will succeed in having longevity, clarity, ease, and reliability with an instrument that is so unique to you that it's worthy of care. And I think that's why we're here.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Do y'all see how much why I love this woman? I mean, so I told her before we got started, I get to be the trainee and the guinea pig, and you're going to hear all of my stories of, responding to Brienne and her little tricks on getting you to talk when you don't want to talk. We'll talk about that as well. So you're going to, these are going to be stories that are not made up or whatever. Like, these are my stories.
This is our dynamic, y'all. This is us.
This is us. I mean, just before we started, literally, I was just doing my little calm down routine. And she's like, that's a lovely little sound you need to do again in order to get your voice ready. I mean, like, there's no getting away from it. Okay. So just imagine if she's officially your coach.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. I do turn it off. People have asked me, they'll hear what I do and they'll go, so are you always listening to voices? And truly, I'm not. I promise I can turn it off. And at the same time,
when it doesn't sound right, and they be like, and my friend.
Tell me more. Let's do a few things together.
Yeah, I'll tell you about the messenger messages another time in the next episode, I believe, because you're going to get to hear all of my stories. Okay. So today, when we're talking about that hidden prep tool, our voice, and that if you're a public speaker, you clearly use, but you don't think about, you're thinking always about writing the speech, right? I mean, I've been speech writing since I was 14. I made that reference. I end up being a speech writer, even though that's never my official title ever, but I have written speeches for not just for myself, but for elected officials, for, heads of university systems, all the things. I'm like, it has become a part of me. And as I stated, during that time, it's always on making sure the words get on the paper correctly, that they're in the right order, maybe a little bit about the cadence, depending on who I was writing for, and assuming their voice, right, in order to make sure the words come across correctly. Yes. But never did we talk about what they need to do in order to care for their voice, to make sure that they can be effective. You see it all the time. People have their bottle of water, which definitely is a helper, right?
Yeah.
So that you're not having to keep clearing your voice or whatever, but like not really getting to the meat of it. And, one of the things we say is like, you might have the best copywriter on the block, but if you deliver those words in your speech and it's flat, it's monotone, it doesn't have any oomph to it, then what are you really doing? And tell me, let's talk a little bit more about that, Brienne.
Absolutely. So you referenced, you're writing for the voice of that person. So yes, there's figurative voice, right? Our message and how that's coming across. But the physical instrument of our voice has so much to do with that. That intonation and pitch and volume are all integral components to this. And also, when a speaker is not engaging to you, and more often than not, it's not because of what they're saying, it's because of how they're saying it. Yes. So you're either stuck listening, depending on where you're at, the event, whatever the case may be, just, hoping to try to tease out some little, nugget from it, or tuning out. Or I've worked with folks who are in radio, for example, and they are using a voice that is, again, not their natural sound. One voice that's pretty common in that sphere is Fry. And so people get down here thinking that that's going to be effective because it's lower. People turn them off. They've straight up told me, I will turn someone off if I hear that. Now, I recognize these are preferences and biases. We can get into that. But when it comes to what you are capable of in your intonation and having the tone match what you want to say, not just reading words for the sake of reading words, that's going to change the game.
Yes.
It's going to change the game. Yeah.
Don't even get me started. That's a whole other conversation. My pet peeve about just reading the words. I mean,
Mhm.
again, I was trained
Mhm.
as a public speaker. I literally did the whole extemporaneous speaking thing. So you
Right.
give me a note card and 3 points and I'll make up whatever.
Yeah. And with that though, Patricia, the voice still matters, right? You can still
Yes.
make it up on the spot. But imagine if you were still reducing your voice to again, that monotone or flat
Mhm.
or maybe not so engaging, and that kind of stays here, or maybe there's nervousness and shakiness. Those are elements that can absolutely be enhanced and match who you are. Your voice, intonation, and tone and use is going to be very different than somebody else's. And thank goodness. That's what
Yes.
we want to showcase, because the other thing I find is that people can find their natural voice and I help guide them to that, but without sounding put on. So what I mean by
That's
that is somebody will
smart.
come to me, yeah, and they'll be like, but I don't want to sound fill in the blank. I don't want to sound over the top. I don't want to sound like I'm Minnie Mouse up here. Or often until they recognize it, women will try to make their voices lower to sound more authoritative like their male counterparts, especially in male dominated spaces. But none of those things are you. So we're not here to box it into what's dynamic and everybody's up and going and we're talking with passion. No, that's not real. So that's the big myth I think that people think of when they're preparing for their speeches. The voice can actually be a vehicle to engage the audience, not to repel them with something that doesn't even match who you are.
I want to go back to a word that you
Mhm.
just said because it's so important. It's a vehicle, which
Yeah.
means it's moving and taking you somewhere,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And you want to move with with not just your words, but helping using your voice to help move people to where you want them to be. Whether
Yes.
you're in the classroom, whether you're in the courtroom, whether you're
Yeah.
speaking to a crowd, like
Yeah.
there's a point, there's a goal that you're
Yeah.
trying to achieve. And the words and your voice have
Mhm.
to, flow together and work
Absolutely.
together to make that happen.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, and we were actually chatting about this the other day, even something, again, a myth in this idea of I have to project my voice because I'm speaking on stage. Whether or not they're using a microphone, that's a whole nother
Oh my
topic.
God.
But honestly, yes, you can learn to safely project, because we go back to the health and safety of not overdoing it to the actual instrument. But also, you don't want to just project a wall of sound at people and expect that to be engaging either. So there are ways to be in that vehicle movement and play. I always talk about playing with your voice. And that is something that I think when you embrace that, it gives you so much more freedom for what you can do and how you're saying it.
Yes. And so for anyone who thinks it's not because Brienne was being funny when she just said that, but I know the conversation. I called her or I messaged her when I was watching the NFL draft with my husband, and these people who would get on stage and start screaming into the mic as opposed to letting the mic do the work for them and them just doing it. I was just like, oh my God, we need connections so that we can get folks trained up on mic usage. And she was like, oh no, what's going on? I was just like, no, this is bad. And, it's that thing though, but that's that piece of training that,
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
very few people really engage in. I know
Mm-hmm.
I've been caught off guard, when you're with you're someplace where the mic works very well and having
Sure.
to pull back and knowing that I need
Yep.
to adjust
Yep.
because my message may get lost because they're just going to hear this piercing sound in their ear because of something I
Yeah.
don't have any control over, right? That part I
Exactly.
don't have any control over. But I can do
Exactly.
what I can do to pull back. Or worst case scenario, when the mic goes out,
Yeah.
and now you have to
Yep.
adjust and project in a whole other way. And what does that do? Because
Yeah.
I've had those moments where I'm speaking without a mic
Yeah.
and probably overdoing it because next thing I know, like there's a give in my voice and I'm like, oh, so
Exactly. Yeah.
there, this
Exactly.
is where having some real sound advice and part of it just being aware so that
Mm-hmm.
you can adjust accordingly.
Yes. And always use the tools that you can at your disposal externally. But this is where this really leads into this idea of when the voice is about to give or crack or feels weaker, or you are to that point of straining to be able to accomplish this speech, event, talk, that is a signal that you want to be able to honor. But you can also prevent that much more effectively if you've done some conditioning, i.e., warming up your voice, preparing your voice, the same way you're going to be practicing your speech. And no, I'm sorry, practicing your speech and reading aloud is not the same as warming up your voice. It's not a thing.
Okay, dig a little bit into that.
Yeah.
Because there's a point about saying, how you say it matters more than what you say.
Yes. So think of this as a related component. People will say to me, well, I warmed up my voice because I've been talking all day. If you're speaking in a way that's ultimately not effective, efficient, using the mechanism in its best way possible, you're talking in the same system that you started with. Whereas the voice warm-ups, preparing yourself, conditioning yourself, puts you in that optimal space, and then you can speak from there. So this is similar but related. So yes, the words you're saying will have more oomph and juiciness because your voice is brighter, it's richer sounding usually, it can project easier, it can inflect easier, but just talking doesn't warm it up. Because most of the time you're already speaking in a way that is not as optimal. For example, if I just stayed in kind of a lower pitch, kind of tighter voice here, many of you can probably hear the difference. It's not so extreme that it's not tolerable to listen to, but it's also not my most natural voice. If I lived here and this was my MO, this is where I'm like, well, I've talked all day here. Isn't my voice warmed up? It's not going to feel good. Because I can already start to feel it pressurize here in the throat. The sound is very condensed to me. So do you see what kind of cycle that puts you in? If you're like, well, I warmed up because I spoke, that's not the same as going, and putting your voice in its place of optimal performance first. No athlete's going to be like, I'm limping a little bit today, but I'm going to run anyway. No. You want to make sure that you first warm up that leg, that ankle, whatever it may be, and get it to its best place, then go do the activity.
And so, because I'm all, I'm a singer, been singing since, in the choirs and all that since I was little. And so there are those things where you're like, oh, okay. And people automatically just assume voice care only applies to singers, right? And I know that when I haven't been, if I've been talking, but I haven't been singing, and then all of a sudden I try to go be a part of something and sing, like that voice gives so quick, it's not even funny, right?
That's a great example.
But we don't think about that applying to us in our speaking and public speaking in the same way.
Correct. And we use that speaking voice 100-fold times more than any singing, even car singing, shower singing, whoever you might be. Professional singers speak more than they sing,
Yes.
and they're paid to do that every night. Well, let's not hope every night. That's a whole nother overused thing. Right. So that's where I get, really encouraged by professional speakers and public speakers who are open to looking at this as part of their well-being and their prep, because on the flip side, I've had people in my DMs 24 hours before their event saying, Brienne, my voice is going. It's weaker. I'm losing my voice. And fortunately, we're able to do some things in the interim, but who needs that kind of stress? The time away that they could have been spending either preparing their talk more, their voice more, or networking, because we have to keep in mind, most of these places we go to speak, if we're not virtual, we are actively still talking, networking, doing the things with our voice. So in this person's case, she was able to recover in time to feel strong enough on stage. But why wait to have that kind of disruption when it's something that's so very much preventable?
Yeah. I mean, I just really love, because where we started about this being, the hidden tool, but we use it every day.
Yep. Sure do.
All day.
Sure do. And what I think is so fascinating too is because most people don't necessarily think of their voice when they start to become aware of it, sometimes you can swing too far to the other side and start to be critical of your own voice. And I don't think that serves us either, because we're using this instrument every day to share our message. Mm-hmm. And if you criticize or dislike or even hate something that you're using to share your message, that does not carry energetically to the listener in the best way possible either. So I think we have to be mindful of how we're speaking to ourselves about our voice, about how we sound, and that it's okay if it's going to crack sometimes.
Yeah.
That's totally normal. We all have it. And you don't want to ever aim for some false perfectionism or some voice that's not you, but you also want to know that your voice will give you those signals each and every day. So if it's feeling a little weaker that day, honor that. Yeah. If you're not feeling like you want to project on the stage that day, double check that mic is ready to go. Use the supports that you have, because those moments when you are in stressful triage mode can feel really lonely and frustrating and inconvenient. And it's not a fun place to be.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and I know that in our next chapter of our conversation, we're going to talk and get more in detail on health and stamina in particular. Yeah. And, that's when you'll get to like hear a lot of my Patricia stories. But before that, let's talk a little bit more about the importance of adding that voice care to your public speaking routine as a tool. When you're thinking about your voice being a tool, what is it that we can recognize, first be aware of, and then incorporate into our regular everyday, toolbox to help us along the way?
Mm-hmm. So I would encourage all of you who are needing your voice every day, and especially as you're preparing for different kind of events and speaking engagements, to really begin to set yourself just a protocol. Okay. You already have very likely your to-do list of what is needed to prepare. So I want you to put voice on there, and specifically voice warm-up. Now, this may look very different to different people. We're not actually going to get into different warm-up styles, right this moment. But there is what Patricia said earlier, the intention and awareness to just saying, let me just check in with my voice. The warm-ups are going to calm any nervousness. Okay. Vocalizing can calm nervousness. That is a known factor of the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay. It can stabilize your sound. It can brighten your sound. You can start to warm up a little more with volume and pitch. So even that little, at the beginning of our conversation, that little that Patricia and I were playing with, you can play with that too. And I know most people go, oh, so you just want me to hum? Yeah, kind of. It's gonna start simply because I don't want this to be something that is a burden.
Right.
It needs to be a benefit. And doing so means that you are doing it not to check a box off that to-do list, but to become more intimately knowing with your voice and what it can do. So if it's not doing certain things, for example, you go to glide around and nothing's coming out. Okay, let's take a step back and say, is my voice ready for what I need it to do today? Do I need to make some adjustments? So that's something that I talk about a lot. There are resources both in my website. I have a top 10 tips handout freebie that people can have, but just knowing that you can take that intentional act of saying my voice needs some TLC before I get on stage is huge. You're miles ahead of, I guarantee you, 90% of your colleagues.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And putting yourself in such a better state of relief. And I say relief because, again, you don't want to get up on stage and have the mental drain of worrying about your voice when you're trying to get your message across. Nobody wants to worry about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God, this is so great. I'm so excited about the next one. This has been great. All right. So we're going to end each session with a little leadership voice nugget. And for me, that little nugget's going to be, remember, as a leader in your industry, in your community, whatever it is, recognizing that your voice is a valuable tool that's a part of your leadership growth and development. That's my nugget to, to really take away from this time. And so as such, that we need to elevate it and do the things we need to do to take care of it so that it can be a tool that we can reach for on a moment's notice if need be, or with lots of prep. But in any case, it'll be there. It'll be a tool that's there and working, right? We don't want any rusty tools coming out of our toolbox.
True. I love that.
What about you, Brienne? What do you think is probably a lovely little leadership voice nugget for today?
The voice is going to be perceived by the listener in whatever way that may be. And we don't have control over that. And yet, especially in leadership, there are moments where the sound of your voice, how you sound, may not land and either result in communication breakdown or a disruption to how you're trying to lead a team, or perhaps even when it comes time to promotion, because there are things that people have, in confidence told me that they are chastised for because of how their voice sounds, what they're trying to say versus the tone that they use. And that's part of what the subtext is of what we're talking about here. You can change that. You can shift that. And it doesn't have to be at the cost of who you really are.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful note to end today on. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be coming back next time, and we're going to be talking about health and stamina and really getting deep and telling the stories, oh my goodness, on ourselves. Me. And and those little messages that I've gotten before, I'm like, hey. So look forward to having that conversation. Be sure to join us if you want to learn more about the services that either of us provide. You can do so at the links. Especially, we're going to make sure and drop Brienne's top 10 tips handout in the comments so that you can access those and change how you approach your voice and using it as a tool right now today. Take care, everyone. We'll talk